This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Police shootings grab headlines, especially when someone is killed. In April, 2 different police shootings in New Haven and Wethersfield, Connecticut caught the attention of residents and the media. But it was the Wethersfield story that stayed with people, because that's where an 18-year-old man died after fleeing police. Today we learn more about Anthony Jose Vega Cruz and the circumstances leading up to that day. He was known as Chulo to family and friends. We'll hear from one of them coming up. Now, we're talking about this Wethersfield story today because it's the focus of a half-hour documentary produced by Connecticut Public in collaboration with Hartford filmmaker Pedro Bermudez. It's called Collision Course. Reporter Vanessa De La Torre is the supervising producer of the film. She joins me today in studio. Vanessa, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Lucy, thanks.
We also want to hear from our listeners, especially if you live in Wethersfield. Have you seen Collision Course? It's streaming at our website, wnpr.org/where we live. And you can join us at the number 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Vanessa, you've been on the show before talking about the many stories that you've reported. This is a new project for you, working on a documentary. Why this story?
So, Lucy, we hear about police shootings, and it tends to be in the national news. And in April, as you mentioned, an 18-year-old died in Wethersfield. So Wethersfield is just like a 15-minute drive from our station. And so this big news story happened in our own backyard. And our newsroom really kicked into gear when this happened, covered the initial protests, covered the release of the dash cam footage, wrote additional stories on the officers involved. But we really thought, we really need to get more context about what happened, who were the people involved, and try to answer a couple questions. Because whenever there's a major news story like this, a couple questions come to mind. One is, could this have been prevented in some way? Another question is, could this happen again? So we really had those questions in mind as we made this documentary.
So remind our listeners what happened. I believe it was April 20th, 2019, this traffic stop. Tell us first about Anthony Jose Vega Cruz.
Sure. So on April 20th, it was a rainy day. It was late afternoon, early evening, when Vega Cruz decided to, go out with his girlfriend to get something to eat. And he lived in Wethersfield, and so they decided to get in his car. And even the fact of getting in his car was something that was a little bit stressful for the girlfriend because he had a headlight out, and so she was just kind of worried about him possibly getting pulled over. But he was telling her, no, we're going to get in the car. We're going to go drive there to get something to eat. And so on the way there, they are pulled over by Wethersfield police. The initial word is that they pulled him over because there was the plate on his car did not match the reading that the police got in his car. So basically, it was a misuse of plates. So from there, Officer Peter Salvatore pulled him over. As he's approaching Vega Cruz's vehicle, you see in the dash cam footage that the vehicle takes off. And so from there, you have a police pursuit. One of the other officers in the area, Ulysses, he joined the pursuit. From there, it escalates further. It happens so quickly. So once he joins the pursuit, you see in the dash cam footage that Vega Cruz's vehicle starts to spin out. Again, remember, this was a rainy day. He spins out. Soon we see that there's a collision from Ulysses' SUV rams head-on into Vega Cruz's vehicle. We also see in the dash cam footage that then the officer gets out of his vehicle, approaches with his gun drawn. Vega Cruz continues to try to flee, and from there on, we see in the dash cam that Ulysses fires 2 shots into the windshield of Vega Cruz's vehicle.
And when the shooting took place, you mentioned it was a rainy day, Silestine Highway, that area very busy during the day.
It's a 4-lane highway, main road.
Something that you said, too, is that many people, when they hear of different incidents that happen, including this 18-year-old driver, there might have been the perception that he was just driving through. He wasn't from Wethersfield, but he, in fact, was. Tell us about his family.
Sure. So, the Vega Cruz family, I'll start by saying that they grew up in Hartford. Vega Cruz's father, Jose Vega, is actually from Puerto Rico. And as a young man, he decided, I want to move to the mainland, and sort of this American dream idea. So he moved to Connecticut, had a lot of different sort of blue-collar type of jobs, had a couple of kids here in Hartford, and one of those kids was Anthony Vega Cruz. And from what we have learned from talking to people who know him and certainly talking to Jose Vega, who was one of the people we interviewed in the film, he, as a young boy, was very close to his mother. It was described as a really, shy, sweet boy, very close to his mother. But 7 years ago, his mother died of cancer. And so what we learned is that really affected Anthony Jose Vega Cruz very deeply. And so, heading into middle school, into high school, had a lot of ups and downs, was sort of skipping school and, kind of having those sorts of issues. But his father decided, we're growing up, we're living in this neighborhood, Orange Street in Hartford. It's kind of a tough neighborhood. I want to move my son away from that. We want to move across the border of Hartford into Wethersfield. And he saw Wethersfield as, sort of a paradise.
And we have a clip of your interview with Jose Vega.
Vi que están pasando tantas cosas hoy día en Hartford.
Yeah, so Jose Vega is telling us that he saw that there was a lot of stuff going on in Hartford, not all ideal. So he decided to look for a better place to raise his family. And so they applied for low-income housing, and they found a place in Wethersfield. And he tells us, the first time he saw that house, it was like a mansion. This was kind of a modest home, but he saw it as a mansion and a great place to raise his son.
And it's ironic that he wanted to move his family out of this neighborhood in Hartford to keep them safe.
Right.
And 6 months later.
Right. And just as you said, this move to Wethersfield happened just 6 months before the shooting. And the shooting happened just about a block and a half away from where they lived.
You're hearing Vanessa De La Torre. She's a reporter at Connecticut Public, also supervising producer of a CPTV documentary called Collision Course that takes a look at this story out of Wethersfield that happened earlier this year, where 18-year-old Anthony Jose Vega Cruz was killed by police after fleeing police after a traffic stop. You can join our conversation, especially if you're from the town of Wethersfield. We wanted to hear about how the community is responding to this documentary, but also just to what happened in your town. The number 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So you talk about Vega Cruz, and we learn more about him in this documentary by you speaking to his father, to his girlfriend, to people that knew him. But this isn't just the story of Vega Cruz. It's also what happened and the background of this Wethersfield police officer, Leyu Ulizier. Tell us about what you learned about him.
Sure. We wanted to learn more about the two lives that intersected on April 20th. And so one of those folks, obviously, is the officer who fired those fatal shots, Officer Ulizier. And we learned that he also grew up in Hartford for much of his life. He's the son of Haitian immigrants. We talked to people who know the family. They say, this is a really nice, hardworking family, really good people, very faithful people. And so getting closer to his high school years, his family also decided to move to Wethersfield to seek a better life, a better education for their children. And so we learned that, in high school, Officer Ulizier, as a teenager, he gets more serious about life. He decides, I want to enter a career of public service. And so after high school, he enters the military. He enters the Connecticut Air National Guard. He also serves in the Air Force Reserve. And during that time, he's also becoming a police officer.
So learning about him, talking with people who knew him in the documentary, I understand he declined to participate, and there's a reason for that.
Right. This whole investigation into the shooting and whether the use of force was justified, it's still an ongoing investigation. And so we attempted to talk to Officer Ulizier, and I briefly spoke to him on the phone a couple of times. And he says, I really want to share my side of the story, but, there's an ongoing investigation. But we did talk to his attorney, Elliot Spector, and so we do have that perspective in the film.
And we're going to be hearing more from the documentary Collision Course. This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. My guest today, Vanessa De La Torre, as we take a closer look at the story that happened 6 months ago, the focus of the documentary Collision Course, which is streaming at WNPR.org and CPTV.org. You can join us too. The number 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. The Hartford State Attorney's Office is still investigating the Wethersfield police shooting of Anthony Jose Vega Cruz. He was killed after fleeing a traffic stop earlier this year. It's the focus of a half-hour CPTV documentary called Collision Course. The film examines the dynamics at play that led the lives of two men, 18-year-old Vega Cruz and Officer Lew Ulizier Jr., to collide on Wethersfield's Silas Deane Highway. That was in April of this year. But the documentary also refocuses attention on the Hartford suburbs' practice of heavily enforcing motor vehicle violations, such as tinted windows and pulling over Black and Hispanic drivers at disproportionately higher rates when compared to white residents. Do you live in Wethersfield? Have you seen the documentary Collision Course? We want to hear from you. The number 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Coming up, we're going to hear from one of the friends of Anthony Jose Vega Cruz. His name is Greg Brown. But I wanted to continue my conversation with Vanessa De La Torre, who's supervising producer of this documentary, Collision Course. We learn about Vega Cruz's family background. We learn more about the officer involved and his background. But what did you learn about that day? Because it's natural for people who heard about what happened on April 20th, Vanessa, when this young man was pulled over. It's natural for people to ask, well, why did he flee police?
Sure. And so that's a question we also were interested in learning about when we first set out to do this documentary. And in the course of our reporting, we learned an important detail about Vega Cruz's past driving history, and that is that he did not have a license. He did not have a license to drive. He was 18 years old, and we talked to folks who know him, and they said that he was working toward getting a permit, and that was part of his whole plan to sort of set things straight in his life. Wanted to graduate from high school. He was a senior in high school, wanted to get his permit, wanted to get a job after graduation. But that is possibly a pretty good reason why he decided to flee, aside from being scared. And that's something that we talked to his girlfriend about. She was in the car with them. She said he basically panicked when he was pulled over. But so he didn't have a license. And we also learned that a couple weeks prior to the April 20th traffic stop, there was another traffic stop in Wethersfield that happened just after midnight on one of the town roads, in which the same vehicle as Vega Cruz's, same vehicle, same license plate, was pulled over again for a suspected misuse of plates. And in that dash cam footage, which we also showed in the film, you see an officer approaching the vehicle, and as he's approaching the driver's side window, that's when the car takes off. And so you sort of see a similar pattern in the April 20th traffic stop, where the officer sort of gets out of his vehicle, walks toward Vega Cruz's car, and then you see the car take off.
And so the question of why Vega Cruz fled police, because he did not have a license.
He did not have a license, and he had previously also been stopped in Hartford for not having a license and not having a registered vehicle. Mm.
But the other question that many residents have is, so if someone evades police and flees, how should the police respond? Because the incident 2 weeks prior to this particular day, if it was Vega Cruz driving that particular car, the way police responded that night, very different from the day.
Exactly. So in that case, you see from the dash cam footage, and we also read an incident report on the traffic stop, that officer decided not to pursue the fleeing vehicle, decided to write a report, include everything that he saw, but in that case did not pursue, because we all know that police pursuits are very dangerous, not just for the officer, but for citizens in the area and also for the driver who's fleeing.
Coming up, we're going to hear from State Senator Gary Winfield talking about some of the accountability measures that lawmakers have put in place, including how police departments should respond in terms of when a vehicle is leaving the scene or fleeing a traffic stop. So coming up, we are going to talk more about that. But I wanted to leave time to take some calls from the community. You can join us, too. The number 888-720-9677. Chuck's calling from Wethersfield. Chuck, you're on the show.
Hi. Thank you very much for taking up this conversation. I just wanted to make a quick point. And I'm a resident of Wethersfield, and I live not very far from where the tragic incident took place. And the only thing I just wanted to kind of re-point out is that the Silestine Highway is exceptionally busy at almost all times of day. That's a very dangerous situation, and in taking off or attempting to take off a second time from police, that becomes a public danger. I know you just touched on that, but that was kind of the point that I wanted to make. As somebody who's on that highway multiple times per day, that becomes a very, very, very dangerous situation if you're talking about slick roads, high rate of speeds, and a danger to the public. So I'm not making a value judgment on whether the shooting is or isn't justified. I'm not making a character judgment on anything about the decision of the young driver. It was a tragic incident. I wish it didn't happen to anybody involved. But as a resident, I could have very well been on that highway, and that's something that I just want folks to think about if it was in their neighborhood as well, too.
Chuck, I wanted to ask before we let you go, we did reach out to the town council, and also including Police Chief James Citran. They declined to be on the show today. They also declined to participate in this documentary, Collision Course. But since you are a Wethersfield resident, what are the conversations happening in your community? Are they the same points that you raise? And how do you want your town leaders to respond?
Yeah, by and large, and in my limited sort of understanding, the conversations, while they might not be taking place in the public eye as it's ongoing, it is obviously a topic of conversation among leaders in the town in terms of, not only the perception of the town. As you mentioned, there's some of those statistics that point to it. Wethersfield does have a lot of lanes that become very popular throughways to different points on the highway, and while that's convenient in some instances, that may very well lead to some disproportionate, I've been stopped in Wethersfield on multiple occasions, and, it's a heavily policed, the Silestine Highway is home to the police department itself, so there's always police vehicles there. The conversations are taking place. It's obviously something that I know that the leaders are conscious of, but I just wanted to, kind of make that brief point. There's a lot of, the suburbs, the high school, there's schools on the Silestine Highway, there's kids in that area. It's very important to make sure that public safety is critical.
Chuck's calling from Wethersfield. Thank you for calling into the show.
Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the documentary.
You can join us, 888-720-9677. I wanted to take another call. Al from West Hartford. Al, you're on the show.
Yes, thank you. You briefly touched on some of the points I was going to, as did the previous caller. This is a terrible situation. I do feel badly for this young man's father, but if we look at the root cause, what caused this whole situation, which irrevocably changed this young man's life, or ended this young man's life, and also affected the police officer who had to take a life, was this young man's decision to break the law. We have laws for reasons, and if you make a conscious decision over and over to break even minor laws, it establishes a pattern. And okay, today it's a motor vehicle issue. Tomorrow it escalates to become something bigger. So I do believe that the police should enforce traffic laws, to the fullest extent of the law. And if someone takes off on the police, yes, they should pursue it. I know it's dangerous for the community writ large, but it's even more dangerous to allow someone to continue to get away with being a scofflaw. I mean, we all have to follow the laws. Because if we do not follow the laws, then we are no longer a community of laws. We are we're not civilized anymore. So that's what I want to say. And like I said, it's a tragedy. It should never happen. This poor young man's life is over, and it's terrible, but over something so small. But, overall, in the big picture, we are a nation of laws where we need to establish and follow our laws.
Al, thank you for your call into Where We Live. You can join us, 888-720-9677. Vanessa De La Torre, I wanted to follow up with you, first to respond to what the callers have raised. Al, most recently, the last caller that we took, saying that there's a reason we have laws and they should be followed. But let's talk about the idea that when police should pursue and when they should use deadly force. Depending on the town you live, the policies are very different.
Right, and those comments are comments that we've heard in Wethersfield, so it's not surprising. But you also pointed out that pursuits are dangerous, and so there are certain policies in place to ensure that police aren't chasing drivers for minor offenses, like, say, a misuse of plates or an administrative issue. Another thing is that, this idea of scofflaws and getting away with it, in the end, a life was taken. And so we talked to Vega Cruz's attorney, or the family attorney for Vega Cruz, Ben Crump, and he's saying, look, here you have a teenager, an 18-year-old who made a mistake. But does that mean that he should have lost his life over a mistake? In these situations, you expect police officers to try to de-escalate rather than escalate. And so that was their point of view.
And the dash cam video shows clearly that the officer in question that killed Vega Cruz didn't necessarily de-escalate when he jumped in front of his vehicle.
Right, so that's a big point of contention. Not only when he jumped close in front of it, you could argue whether he was right in front of the vehicle, but also in the pursuit sort of gets right into the middle of Silestine Highway. And so if you watch the dash cam, you could see Vega Cruz's vehicle approaching, and then in an attempt to avoid hitting his vehicle, swerves, and that's when he sort of spins out and kind of crashes into the sidewalk area of Silestine Highway. And from there, you see the officer get out of his vehicle with his gun already drawn and trying to approach the vehicle on foot.
This is Where We Live. You're hearing Vanessa De La Torre, reporter and supervising producer for Collision Course, a new documentary from Connecticut Public. Again, it focuses in on what happened on April 20th, 2019, when Anthony Jose Vega Cruz was fatally shot by a Wethersfield police officer. You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I wanted to bring into the conversation now one of Vega Cruz's friends, Greg Brown is joining us in the studio. Greg, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
We actually spoke a few weeks after, just a couple of weeks after what happened to your friend, and that's when we first met you at a conversation in Hartford. Tell us how you got to know Vega Cruz.
We grew up together. We're from the same neighborhood. We're from a very close-knit family, So growing up, he was more than just, another friend from the neighborhood. He was like family. Like, I would wake up and he would be in my house. Like, that's how close he was. So this whole situation, I get asked what type of person he was, who he was, his intentions. And from my heart, I can vouch that he was a genuinely good person, So this situation is unfortunate, but we have to learn from it,
When you spoke with him when his dad moved him out of Hartford, him and his family, to Wethersfield, what were some of the conversations you had with him about that move?
I remember it like yesterday. When I first found out that he was moving, I asked him where, because he lived there his whole life. His family lived there before he was born. So when he said Wethersfield, I got, in my mind, I'm like, okay, that's a big difference from Hartford, So my dad lived there, so it's kind of, I had in my mind, okay, listen, I'm going to tell you from what I know. So I spoke to him about it, and I told him basically Hartford and Wethersfield are two different areas. They're polar opposites. Wethersfield is more conservative suburbs versus Hartford, city-like area. The police in Wethersfield are more strict. They have, I would say, from looking at the statistics and everything that we've learned from the research, that Wethersfield is very, very high on racial profiling. And even so, with the vehicles that he drove, he was just bound to get pulled over at least once.
Did you warn him to stay off Silas Dean or to not drive at all?
When I would give him rides home, he warned me to stay off of Silas Dean. So, I I basically knew where his mind was. Like, he knew what he was getting himself into,
Vanessa, I wanted to turn back to you because Greg mentioned the data shows that the town of Wethersfield, the way they police, there are racial disparities. What can you tell us about that?
Right. And thank you for pointing out the term. Racial disparities is a little different from racial profiling. And so there's data dating back several years, and this is all organized by the Institute for Municipal and Regional Policy based out of Central Connecticut State University. And they're tasked by the state to collect police traffic stops and to analyze the data to determine whether there are any racial disparities, any patterns of racial disparities that pop up in any of the police departments across the state. And so what they've found, these researchers have found that Wethersfield stands out as an outlier when it comes to racial disparities in traffic stops. For our purposes for the film, we really focused in on low-level traffic stops. So, for example, non-moving violations, for example, like window tints, administrative issues such as misuse of plates, issues such as not having a front license plate. That's something that could definitely get you pulled over in a town like Wethersfield. And so, we determined, and just by reading the reports and also talking to the researchers, that Wethersfield certainly stands out. But another way that Wethersfield stands out is that they completely, reject the data. And of all the police departments that the researchers, go to talk about their findings with, Wethersfield stands out in that they say, you know what, we really are not hearing you right now. They really object to, for example, even the term racial profiling. So, for example, this project is technically termed the Connecticut Racial Profiling Prohibition Project. And so that in itself is a sort of a doorstop when they try to go into Wethersfield to talk about this issue.
Something that Greg said earlier, that Wethersfield is known for, their police are known for being more aggressive. That's not just an anecdote. That's actually something that the police chief told the town council earlier this year. Tell us a little bit more again about Police Chief Citran's comments. Again, we did reach out to him to come on the show today. He declined.
Sure. So Citran, he's been the police chief in Wethersfield for almost about, I would say, 17 years. But he's been with the department for much longer than that, since the 70s. But he's been the chief for about 17 years. And he goes by, a strategy of we have to enforce all of the laws on the books. Even if people might consider them minor motor vehicle violations, we have to enforce them because we want our officers, we want our department to be seen as aggressive. And he sees this as a deterrent for, so-called criminals to come in and, wreak havoc in town.
Greg Brown, again, a friend of the late Anthony Jose Vega Cruz, who was killed in April. You also said that this is a tragedy, but we all need to learn from this. Tell us what you mean. What do you want to see happen?
Honestly, we have to look at it as this is one incident that just caught the public eye. But situations like this happen every day. There's a broken bond between the police and our communities because we have situations where we get pulled over, we get stopped on the street, and that's not just for African Americans or Latinos. That goes for Arabs. That goes for Muslims, that goes for anyone of the minority culture, And until we fix the bond between the police and the communities, we're going to keep hearing situations like this. We're going to keep having victims lose their lives by the hands of the people who are supposed to protect us,
Before we take some calls, and again, if you're on hold, stay with us. We're going to get to you in just a moment. The number 888-720-9677. Vanessa, you talked to an educator that had Vega Cruz in her class, and the subject of relations between the community and police come up with these young people, as well as conversations about what they should do if a police officer stops them. What did she tell you?
Right, so we're talking about Nydia Roman, and she's a youth development specialist at Opportunity Academy, which is where Vega Cruz was attending high school at the time of his death. And as part of the lessons at Opportunity Academy, one of them is, what to do in situations where you're stopped. And this is part of a whole sort of life skills curriculum there, not just talking about, math, science, and English, but, for example, how do you approach a job interview? And in this case, also, how do you approach a traffic stop when you're pulled over? And one of the things that Nydia Roman told us is that just, maybe a month or two prior to the shooting, they showed a documentary in class called The Hate You Give, in which there is a pretty prominent scene of a fatal police shooting. And so they had a discussion in class, and, Vega Cruz was in that discussion. But, when she talks to students about these issues, there's immediately sort of a distrust of police, a fear of police, of what might happen, because they've all seen these shootings that are out in the public sphere of fatal police shootings. They've heard from friends and relatives of their interactions with police, and it does create this distrust when they are in those situations.
Greg, can you add to that? Because we had a caller earlier say if your friend had just complied, this wouldn't have happened, that Silas Dean is a very busy road, that a pursuit of any kind is also dangerous. But just the idea that even if a young person is told, if the police stop him or her, that you should comply, it's not really that simple in the minds of young people, is it?
No, it's never that simple. When we talk about obeying the laws, that's basically, if you see a sign that says no turn on the red, but you're in a rush to get somewhere, are you going to take that turn on red when you have that opportunity? Yes. But that's a law that we break every day, But when you talk about he could have stopped, he shouldn't have taken off, that is a decision that he made at that time, and that's the decision that, ultimately led to him losing his life. But do you think that even if he stayed, that he would have still been here? Honestly, we don't know that, because when you come into contact with the police officers, you have that fear in the back of your mind, What's going to happen? We see it on the news every day. We see it on, social media. We constantly hear about victims who are dying at the hands of our police. So the fear that he would have had, I'm pretty sure that he had in his mind, is a fear that I have in my mind, when I get stopped by police. I'm pretty sure we all have that fear in our mind, You never know the outcome of a situation, so your actions and the police actions are all very vital,
You can join our conversation, 888-720-9677. That was Greg Brown, a friend of Anthony Jose Vega Cruz, who was killed by a Wethersfield police officer in April of this year. Also with me, Vanessa De La Torre, a reporter for Connecticut Public and supervising producer of Collision Course, a documentary looking at this particular story. Eunice is calling from Glastonbury. Eunice, you're on the show.
Hi, yes, good morning. Thank you so much for taking my call. First, when the show started, my question was, why didn't he stop? That was the first thing. And from continuing to listen to the show, then I started asking myself is about training and what type of training is the police receiving when these incidents happen? Because I know that the laws do have to be obeyed, but we're talking about a minor traffic violation here. We're talking about pursuits that are being dangerous, a life that was lost, And is it worth it? And also, de-escalation. Is there enough training for this incident to de-escalate the situation? Did the person have to be stopped right at that time? Could they, could the police officer then find out where he lived and showed up at his house to prevent this from happening? We understand that he made a lot of bad decisions that day, and this is a very tragic situation. But we're talking about an 18-year-old whose brain's still developing, and fear is very real for a brown or black person when they're stopped. And we really have to think about, how do we prevent this from happening again? How do we prevent this from happening again? Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Eunice from Glastonbury. I wanted to take another call. LaShawn from East Hartford. LaShawn, are you there?
Yes. I had the opportunity to watch the documentary myself, and I do think the young man made some poor choices. But we have to also know that police don't know who they're pulling over when they pull someone over. They don't know that that's an 18-year-old or a 16-year-old kid. And then when that person pulls off, and then the police have to chase you, and then they bump you, and they do all that, they still don't know who you are. All they know is that this person is not following the law, this person is not listening to my commands. And then when he was about to, it looked as though he was about to use the car as a weapon, and that's what led to him being shot, because he pulled toward the cop. That's what I saw. So it's hard for the police to know until they get you out of the car that you're a 16-year-old kid. They don't know what they're dealing with.
Well, thank you, LaShawn, for calling in. I wanted to have Vanessa De La Torre respond to your call. Again, the state's attorney, Gail Hardy's office, is investigating, was this shooting justified? And many of us can watch this video and see different things. We need to be careful about how we portray what we're seeing before us, including this idea that the vehicle could be used as a weapon.
Sure, but I think both callers express a point that comes down to, how do people react under stressful conditions? And so in the case of Vega Cruz, we've heard from his girlfriend who was in the vehicle at the time of the stop, and she says, once they were pulled over, he was very quiet. He wasn't saying much, and she had never seen him that worried. And so the gist we get from her is that he panicked in that moment. He had a fight or flight instinct kick in, and it was flight. In the case of the officer, we've learned more about his past in his previous department of Manchester. And, we read a lot of memos, went through his personnel file, and there were instances where his supervisors had to let him know, look, you kind of lost your composure there when you were in this particular incident. There was an incident about a month and a half before the shooting where we have dash cam footage that we show in the documentary where there was like a minor incident at a mall. It was described as a mall disturbance, and they start pursuing this white van. And it's like not even like a high-speed chase, but they're pursuing the van. And they, on the radio before they pull him over, you can hear someone saying, you know what, if he takes off, don't pursue. Don't pursue this vehicle. Once they pull him over, they sort of box him in. You see Officer Ulizier get out with his gun drawn and starts shouting, show me your hands, in a way that his supervisors later determined that it was too much. And so we have a situation where you have an officer who's reacting under stressful conditions such as a fleeing vehicle. You have Vega Cruz, who's been pulled over and has all these thoughts in his mind, presumably when he's pulled over and decides to flee.
Vanessa De La Torre, again, is supervising producer of Collision Course. We're going to continue talking about that after the break. But first, I want to thank Greg Brown for coming in to talk about his friend. We're sorry for your loss. And before you go, you mentioned that this is a learning opportunity. We should mention that this particular story has really galvanized the community. A lot of people have come forward. What is your response to that?
So one thing I wanted to touch on before I answer that question was, in the documentary, his lawyer mentioned that he did not make a conscious decision. He made that decision because it happened. He made that decision in the split of a second. He didn't have time to think about it. When we talk about our police officers, you go out into the world every day, and you have to risk your life every day. So when you're being trained, how do you handle these situations every day? Like, you're taught to de-escalate situations. You're taught to, handle situations a certain way. Do you feel that situation was handled how it should have been handled? I don't think so. But the documentary, I wanted to say thank you on behalf of his family and the supporters and the Justice for Chulo movement. It was an eye-opener for both sides of the people involved, the victim and I don't want to say murderer, but, the accuser. But I have a lot to say. I just didn't want it.
So, so we did talk to attorney Elliot Spector, who's the lawyer representing Officer Ulizier, and he says in that moment when Ulizier was pursuing Vega Cruz's vehicle that he was reacting to the danger he felt when he fired those shots. He says that in his mind, you have a vehicle that's approaching him. He feared for his life. And so he says it was instinctive. It happened so quickly, but it happened. And that the officer, in this case, Ulizier, was defending himself.
I want to thank you, Greg, for coming in today. And it's hard to always talk on the radio, but when you're talking about someone you've lost, we appreciate that you've come in today.
Thank you.
This is Where We Live. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Coming up, we're going to hear from State Senator Gary Winfield about what happens next and how lawmakers and policymakers are thinking about police accountability and measures in the towns and cities of Connecticut. You can join us, too. Find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. We've been focusing the show today on the CPTV documentary Collision Course, which examines a fatal police shooting in Wethersfield, Connecticut, and the lives that intersected that day. We wanted to update you on some laws that have taken place after this incident. State Senator Gary Winfield, who's co-chair of the Judiciary Committee in Connecticut's General Assembly, leading that effort this past legislative session. He joins us now by phone. Senator Winfield, welcome back to the show.
Good morning.
Tell us, we focused a lot on the particular story out of Wethersfield. Remind our listeners how you and your colleagues worked to strengthen police accountability measures, and what were they?
So after the incidents in Wethersfield and New Haven, there had been an effort in the General Assembly to do police accountability, but it largely failed. My colleagues and I felt like we shouldn't end the session without making sure that we've made another attempt at putting some of those measures through. So we worked on what eventually became Senate Bill 380, and I'll just briefly run through it if that's fine with you.
Perfect.
So the beginning of the bill focuses on a lot of the reports that we do because there's information that we don't have. So it requires incident reports annually of physical force incidents with police and the demographic information associated. It has release of the video that we oftentimes in these incidents want to see, the body cam or dash cam video. And what it says is if the officer has the ability to review the video, which comes out of a 2015 bill we did, 48 hours subsequent to that, the video will be released to the public. And if the officer doesn't review it, then 96 hours after the incident takes place, it will be released to the public. That takes care of this battle we often have with whether or not we can get access to the video. Under the 2015 law, when an officer used physical force upon a person and a person died, the Department of Criminal Justice was required to do an investigation. We've also added to that in this bill when they use deadly force at all, whether the person dies or not. And then we added to the cases where the Department of Criminal Justice would do an investigation. And the information that comes out of that investigation is required to be put on the Department of Criminal Justice website so that it's transparent to the public. When a person was escaping, the officers could use deadly force for a variety of reasons, one of which was to prevent the escape from custody. This bill prevents that. The only way that that officer could use that deadly force is if that person had committed a felony that involves serious physical injury. So it's not just that the person is escaping and they're trying to stop them, but you would have to have that as the reason for doing so. The pursuit policy that the state has hasn't been updated in about 20 years. So this requires that every 5 years it's updated and we keep current with what we know to be best practice. If a vehicle is fleeing, the officers cannot shoot at the vehicle unless there's an imminent threat of death in that situation, which is different than what we've done. The officers can't position their body in front of a fleeing vehicle unless it's already an approved tactic by a department, which it would not generally be. Mm-hmm. They have to notify by law now a jurisdiction when they enter the jurisdiction during a chase. And then we created a task force to look at the interaction between police and the public, focusing on the issue at large, but specifically on the interaction with the individuals who have mental, intellectual, or physical disability. It's one of the things we don't talk about, but it is the genesis of a lot of issues. The issue of traffic stops and issuing a receipt at the traffic stops is an ongoing conversation we've had. And all issues of transparency and accountability.
Before we run out of time, Senator Winfield, I did want to ask, again, a lot of focus on this tragic story in Wethersfield, but broadly, when, again, we have this state racial profiling prohibition project looking at racial disparities in towns, holding police departments accountable for their policing. Wethersfield's police department and the town so far not backing away from how they police their streets in the town of Wethersfield. Is there anything else that the General Assembly can do to hold these police departments accountable when you have this data in front of you 4 years now?
I think the law that passed that has followed up on the original racial profiling bill fix has said that when there's a violation, OPM can withhold monies. I think the legislature needs to make sure that actually happens. I think that's where the power, money from the individual departments, I think that's where the power largely resides. And also myself, Representative Porter, members of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus are continuously hearing from the community and thinking of ways that we can make the laws mean more than they actually currently mean.
Well, we want to thank you, Senator Winfield, for coming on to just update us on what is happening at the state capitol. We appreciate it. Before we end the show, I wanted to go back to supervising producer of Collision Course, the CPTV documentary looking at what happened in Wethersfield. Just remind us again of State's Attorney Gail Hardy's office still investigating this particular incident. Any idea of when that investigation report might be coming out?
Right. So these investigations of fatal police shootings tend to take about a year or so. It's been about 6 months since the shooting. We could expect within possibly the next few months that there could be a decision, but you just never know. There are a lot of different factors in this particular incident that have to be looked into, but we do know that by all intents, it looks like the family of Vega Cruz intends to file some sort of civil action. They've already filed a notice of intent to sue with the Wethersfield town.
And for our listeners who haven't seen Collision Course yet, tell us briefly where they can go. I think it's also being shown again on CPTV soon.
Right. It rebroadcasts tomorrow night, so Tuesday night at 10 p.m. And you could also find it streaming online at cptv.org/Collision Course, also on YouTube and Facebook.
Vanessa De La Torre, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks, Lucy.
Today's show produced by Carmen Baskoff. Special thanks to Leah Brown on the phones. Our technical producer is Kyone Wolf. You can learn more about the show. Just download it using your favorite podcast app. I'm Lucy Nalpathanchel. Thanks for listening.